Why your presence disrupts a married man's stability. Carl Jung. There is a moment that changes everything. You walk into the room, not expecting anything, not trying to prove anything, and suddenly the married man who seemed so settled, so content with his life, becomes someone else entirely. Your eyes linger a second longer, the tone of voice changes, energy changes in a way that is impossible to ignore. Carl Jung has spent his life studying exactly this phenomenon, and what he has discovered is both fascinating and disturbing. Some women carry a presence that doesn't just attract, it destabilizes entire realities. You're not doing anything obvious. He's not flirting, he's not playing games. Yet somehow its mere existence shakes the foundation of its carefully constructed stability. This isn't about being prettier than his wife or using manipulative tactics. This is about archetypal forces operating in the realm of the unconscious, where your rational choices have no power. You become the living mirror of everything he buried to build his perfect life. And that's precisely why his world begins to fall apart the moment you show up. What follows will reveal the psychological mechanics behind this disruption and why he is completely powerless to stop it. The shadow he buried before marriage. Before putting the ring on his finger, every man makes choices about who he needs to be. He decides that certain parts of himself do not fit into married life, into the image of a responsible husband, into the role of a serious and committed man. Then he buries these parts, not because they have disappeared, but because society, family, and even he himself believe that this is what mature men do. These buried parts form what psychology calls a shadow. It's everything he can't be publicly, the adventurous side who wanted to travel the world without a certain destination, the part of him who always dreamed of dropping everything and starting over, the impulse to live without so many rules and responsibilities. When he chooses the stability of the marriage, these parts do not die. They just go to the basement of the psyche, waiting, and then you appear. Without warning, without planning, you carry in your presence exactly what he has locked up. Maybe it's your natural freedom, the way you live without asking anyone's permission, or simply the energy of those who haven't conformed to social expectations. You don't have to do anything. His existence is already a living reminder of everything he gave up. His reaction is not conscious. He doesn't think this woman represents my shadow. What happens is a deep inner turmoil, a restlessness that he cannot name. Suddenly, the life that seemed so certain begins to seem too small. The routine that was comfortable becomes suffocating. And all of this happens because you have activated the part of him that he promised never to visit again. This is not a matter of physical attraction. It is an unconscious recognition that there is another way of living, another version of himself that still pulsates somewhere hidden. And when a man is faced with his own shadow reflected in someone else, the stability he has built begins to crack at the edges. D2. Why stability becomes your prison. Stability promised freedom. It promised peace, security, the feeling of having finally arrived somewhere. But what no one tells you is that too much stability imprisons as much as chaos. A married man builds his life around predictability, same schedules, same conversations, same expectations. At first, it calms down. Over time, this suffocates. He woke up every day knowing exactly what to expect. Breakfast at the same time, conversations about the same things, weekends following the same script. Married life brought organization, it brought structure, but it also brought a repetition that undermines something essential within him. Gradually, he realizes that there is no more room for surprises, for the unexpected, for that feeling of being truly alive. Marriage becomes such a rigid comfort zone that any deviation seems impossible. It can no longer be spontaneous without justifying. You can no longer make impulsive decisions without considering 5 other people and their needs. Each choice needs to pass through the filter of responsibility, of maintaining domestic peace, of what is expected of him as a husband. And then you come along. You who are not tied to the same structures, who move through the world with a lightness that he forgot existed. His presence does not demand anything from him, but precisely for this reason, it reveals the weight of everything that his current life demands. You don't need to demand, question, or challenge. Simply being close to you makes him feel the contrast between the golden prison he built and the freedom that still exists somewhere. His reaction is not about you specifically. It's about what you represent, the possibility of a life that is less controlled, less predictable, less secure perhaps, but infinitely more alive. And this scares him as much as it attracts him, because recognizing that stability has become prison means admitting that he built the bars himself. If you want to understand why your presence disrupts a married man's stability and how this reaction exposes the unconscious shadow he tries to keep hidden, the Jung method is fixed in the first comment. 3. The projection of the anima that nobody mentions. Within the psyche of every man, there is an unconscious feminine image. Not the real woman he married. It is an inner figure, an essence of the feminine that carries everything that he has not developed in himself. The intuition he has repressed, the sensitivity he has learned to hide, the deep emotional connection he has never known how to express. This inner image constantly searches for a form in the external world. When he chose to get married, he projected part of that image onto his wife. She represented, at that moment, the feminine he was looking for. But over time, daily coexistence, shared responsibilities and routine transform the wife into something else. She becomes a partner, mother of children, account companion, and practical decisions. The initial projection dissolves into everyday reality. And then you enter the story. Without carrying the weight of daily coexistence, without the marks of time and accumulated fights, you become a perfect blank canvas for a new projection. He looks at you and sees not who you really are, but the inner image that he carries and that he no longer finds at home. You seem mysterious because he doesn't know you. You seem deep because you're not caught up in the superficial conversations of everyday life. You seem alive because you're not worn out by the routine he shares with his wife. This projection is powerful precisely because it is unconscious. He doesn't know he's projecting. You genuinely believe that you are special, different, unique. And in a way you are, but not for the reasons he imagines. You are special because you represent the feminine, not domesticated by coexistence, not worn out by shared responsibilities, not transformed into something functional and practical. The danger of this dynamic is that it creates an artificial intensity. The attraction he feels is not based on who you really are, but on who he needs you to be to fill the void his married life has created. And the stronger the projection, the more unstable it becomes, because it is responding to something internal to it, not external. 4. When comfort turns into psychological death. There is a brutal difference between being comfortable and being alive. Marriage has brought him a series of comforts. Someone who knows his habits, who prepares coffee the way he likes it, who understands his quirks without having to explain. This comfort is real and valuable. But at some point, without realizing it, he crossed a dangerous line where comfort stopped feeding and began to anesthetize. The established married life no longer demands anything new from him. He doesn't need to strive to impress. He doesn't need to reinvent himself. He doesn't need to surprise or be surprised. Everything is already mapped, known, predictable, and while part of it is thankful for it, another part, a vital and essential part, begins to wither away. It's like a muscle that atrophies when it's not used. He stops feeling that delicious anxiety before a date. Stop thinking about ways to be interesting, to have something new to share. The conversations at home revolve around practical matters: bills, problems with the children, repairs to the house, plans for the weekend. Nothing profound, nothing that makes him think differently, nothing that ignites something inside him. When you show up, something happens that he hasn't felt in years. He feels alive again, not because you did anything specific, but because in your presence he needs to be present. It cannot be on autopilot. You need to pay attention, you need to think about what to say, you need to show yourself interesting again. And this demand, as uncomfortable as it is, awakens him from a slow death he didn't even know he was dying. The tragedy is that he mistakes that feeling of being alive for you being special, when in fact what's happening is that he's finally come out of the dormancy state. Anything new, anyone that takes you out of the established routine, could bring about that same awakening. But he doesn't see that. To him, you are the cause of life that has returned to run through his veins, when in fact you are just the trigger that revealed how dead he was inside. To 5. The unconscious call that he can't ignore. There is a force operating beyond the conscious will. It doesn't matter how much he tries to be rational, how much he lists the reasons for not approaching, how much he remembers his commitments and responsibilities. Something deeper than reason is at work, pulling him towards you with an intensity that frightens him. This call does not come from sexual desire, although it can manifest itself that way. It comes from a fundamental psychological need to find lost parts of oneself. When he looks at you, he unconsciously recognizes aspects of his own psyche that he has abandoned. You carry something that he needs to recover in order to feel whole again. It can be authenticity, it can be freedom, it can simply be the courage to live without so much fear. The problem is that he interprets this call as attraction to you, when in fact it is attraction to what you represent. It's as if you were a map to his internal territories that he hasn't visited in years. And the more he consciously resists, the stronger the call becomes, because the psyche does not give up easily when it identifies an opportunity for healing and integration. He tries to walk away, try to avoid situations where you can be together. He tries to rationalize that this is wrong, that he has a family, that it doesn't make sense. But the unconscious does not operate by logic. It operates out of psychological necessity, and when a deep need is activated, conscious resistance often only increases the pressure within. You become an obsession not because you are irresistible, but because he has projected into this situation a whole promise of transformation. He fantasized that being close to you would be like being born again, starting over, regaining everything he lost over the years of responsibility and commitment. This fantasy becomes so powerful that he begins to live two lives: the external one, where he is a faithful and responsible husband, and the internal one, where he has already experienced 1,000 different scenarios with you. The call he feels is real, but he is misdirected. What he really needs is not in you. It's inside him. But because the inside work is difficult and daunting, it's much easier to project the solution onto someone else. And as long as he doesn't understand this, you will continue to be the center of an emotional storm that actually has nothing to do with who you really are. 6. What his marriage really represents. When he decided to get married, he wasn't just choosing a partner. It was making a statement about who he wanted to be in the world. Marriage represented his definitive entry into adulthood, his acceptance of social rules, his willingness to trade individual freedom for collective security. It was a choice of identity as much as a choice of love. But identities built under social pressure have a problem. They often don't reflect who a person really is, but who they think they should be. He got married because it was the expected next step. Because the family was expecting it, because the friends were doing the same, because I was already a certain age and it seemed like the right thing to do. And maybe he genuinely loved his wife, But the marriage itself carried a much greater symbolic weight than the relationship. Over time, this symbolic weight becomes a heavy armor. Marriage is no longer just a relationship and becomes an institution that he needs to keep running. He's no longer just a man living his life. He's a husband fulfilling a role, and that role comes with strict expectations to be a provider, to be stable, to be predictable, to be secure. All the characteristics that society values, but that can empty a man from the inside. You represent the opposite of all this. You don't carry expectations about it because you're not part of that structure. In your presence, he does not need to be the husband, the provider, the responsible man. It can simply be. And this possibility of existing without the weight of all these social roles is so liberating that it becomes addictive. The destabilization that his presence causes is not about his marriage being bad or about his wife not being enough. It's about him realizing that he built his entire life around a borrowed identity, and now he doesn't know who he really is anymore. Marriage has become the prison, but he is both the prisoner and the jailer. And you, doing nothing but existing, have become the window through which he glimpses a different life. 7. The crisis that his presence unleashes. When you enter his life, even if peripherally, a process begins. It's not dramatic at first. It starts with small restlessness, thoughts that appear out of nowhere in the middle of a meeting or during family dinner. He finds himself thinking about you for no apparent reason, creating imaginary conversations, wondering what you're doing right now. Gradually, these small concerns grow. He begins to question things that he previously accepted without thinking. He looks at his wife over breakfast and wonders when was the last time they felt anything but companionship. He looks at the house, the car, the whole life he has built, and wonders if he really wanted all this or if he just followed the script they gave him. This crisis isn't about wanting to be with you necessarily. It's about realizing that he lives a life that he didn't consciously choose, but that he accepted by omission. For years, it was on autopilot. Wake up, work, come home, repeat. He built a functional but not authentic existence, and his presence shed light on this uncomfortable realization. He enters a state of permanent anxiety. He can no longer find satisfaction in the things that once satisfied him. The wife notices that he is different, more distant, more irritable. He himself does not understand what is happening. He only knows that something fundamental has changed inside him and he cannot go back. The most dangerous thing about this crisis is that he can make destructive choices, trying to solve something that is not where he thinks. You may feel that you need to end your marriage, that you need to be with you, that you need to change your whole life. When in fact, what he really needs is to look within and make peace with the choices he has made, integrate the parts he has abandoned, and consciously decide who he wants to be from now on. But this internal work is too difficult, so he designs the solution into external changes that rarely solve the real problem. 8. Because he will never fully understand. The hardest truth about this whole situation is that he will probably never fully understand what happened. Even years later, even if he goes to therapy, even if he studies psychology, there will always be a part of this phenomenon that escapes rational comprehension. And this is because we are talking about forces that operate at levels of the psyche that consciousness does not fully reach. He can try to explain it to himself in 1,000 different ways. You can say it was physical attraction, you can say it was chemical, you can say you had a special connection. All of these explanations have some truth, but none captures the totality of what really happened. What he can't see is that you were just the mirror, not the cause. Most men in this situation never do the inner work necessary to understand their own psyche. It's easier to blame the inexplicable attraction, the destination, the circumstances. It's more comfortable to believe that you had something special that bewitched him than to admit that he's been living a life out of alignment with his true self for so long that anything authentic destabilizes him. And even if he eventually intellectually understands what happened, understanding is not the same as integrating. He can read about projections, about shadow, about all the psychological concepts that explain this dynamic, and still keep repeating the same pattern with other women in the future. Because intellectual knowledge does not automatically transform the psyche. What remains for him is usually a confused memory of a period when he felt something intense but could not name it. You remain in his memory not as the real person you are, but as a symbol of unlived possibilities, of unchosen paths, of versions of himself who were never allowed to exist. And perhaps that's exactly what his presence has always represented. Not a forbidden love, not an impossible passion, but a painful reminder of all that he abandoned to become the man the world expected him to be.